So about a week ago, I did a video comparing different audio interfaces of different quality and price levels and utilizing them at different settings. It's been a really hot topic lately on how we should best set our instrument input level on an audio interface to get the so-called best results. And there's been a lot of bad advice with that may technically be correct, but doesn't really make much of a difference in the real world. And I wanted to do a video today showing just how little difference anybody is going to be able to perceive, whether you're using a very inexpensive audio interface, using a much more expensive audio interface, or setting it at a reasonable setting so we can plug our guitar in, leave it alone, never having to touch that input again, or constantly playing with it, trying to get it close to clipping and then backing it off, which is just a real workflow killer for basically no benefits. So today I'm going to give you the results of which audio interface was which. And a little spoiler alert, I don't think there was one person who guessed accurately any difference between the absolute bottom of the barrel cheapest interface and the most expensive interface I used, even though I utilized two different settings, one where we left a lot more headroom and one where we were going right to the edge of clipping and backing off again. So kind of what I figured was going to happen. So first of all, I'm going to reveal which audio face was which. Then we're going to look at some of the comments because there really wasn't much data to compile. The vast majority of people didn't know what to answer. They couldn't guess which audio interface was which or which setting was which. And for that reason, there was almost no actual guesses of people trying to say which audio interface was which. And a lot of times the cheapest audio interface got chosen as the best sounding one. And quite honestly, most folks that are claiming to hear a difference between them, I would love to do a blind test between the ones they think they can hear a difference on. I have a feeling that the differences they're hearing would evaporate, which is just a testament to just how great the converters are and even the cheapest audio interfaces in this day and age. All right, without further ado, let's reveal which audio interface was which. So interface number one was in fact the Motu Ultralight Mark V. Interface number two ended up being the cheapest interface that was used, which was the Behringer interface. Interface number three was the Universal Audio Apollo Solo, and by far the most expensive interface that was used. And interface number four was the IK Multimedia AX-I01. So that was kind of the second least expensive audio interface. So now let's get over and take a look at some of the comments of folks guessing which was which. And I specifically asked for folks to put in the comments which audio interface they thought was which. And I gave them the two different settings, both what I considered the optimal setting, which was leaving about 11.5 dBu of headroom, and then one where I was maxing everything out to quote unquote maximize signal to noise ratio, which it really isn't doing in any meaningful way when we're playing a guitar with the volume turned up. But that does cause a lot of issues of constantly having to adjust and being so close to clipping that maybe we ruin a take, which never is a good thing. But here are some of the comments. This comment said, I need new ears. Can't hear a difference at all. This comment said, I listened twice and I can't tell the difference. This comment said, clean 4 equals my favorite clean. Now, again, I would want to take this and do a blind test with it to really discern whether this person could hear a difference. Maybe their ears and brain were playing tricks on them. But he carries on and says, otherwise, couldn't discern much difference. This one says, couldn't tell the difference on the clean drive. Seemed like 2 and 4 held together better, less farty on the bottom. What they were, couldn't tell you. It was all pretty negligible. Let's be straight. I heard so little difference between all the settings. Anyone on the receiving end isn't going to notice a single thing once a mix and additional instruments have been added. If you were to do this in a live gig scenario, not a single person would hear a difference between a $69 or $649 difference. The only difference I heard was one was clean and one was distorted, although I think 2 sounded best with some laughy face emojis. So again, you can see very similar comments. So this is one of the first people that actually tried to guess which was which. And you can see here that they guessed Behringer was number 4. It was actually the AX-I01. They guessed the AX-I01 was number 2, which was actually the Behringer. They guessed Motu Mark V as number 1. That was correct. And they guessed the UAD Solo as number 3, which was actually correct. But the funny part is they said, I'm kidding. No clue differences. So slight. My brain thinks I can hear some noise on 4, but chances are I'm just convincing myself of that to convince myself I can tell the difference. Great video, man. So again, it's kind of funny because this was the closest to being correct, but then he admits that he has absolutely no idea and he's just taking wild guesses. Great comment here. This might have as well been a blind and deaf test. I have no idea which audio interface was which. Any differences I might have heard or imagined were well below any level I'd consider significant. I listen on studio monitoring headphones. As we keep going, considering the vast price differential, my admittedly old ears hear marginal differences. I've convinced myself I like 2 and 4 the best. Interesting. Not as much difference as I thought. I wouldn't even try to guess what was what, but to my ears, interface number 2 sounded marginally the best on distorted sounds, and it was negligible amongst them all on the cleans. So the funny thing there is the one that he felt sounded best was number 2, which was the cheapest audio interface, the Behringer. So here's some more guesses. IK Multimedia number 1, Behringer number 2, that was correct. Apollo number 3, that was correct. And Motu number 4, that was incorrect. So again, pretty good guess, but then he comes and says the reality is that they are all pretty much sound the same. It's hard to tell which one is which. So again, these are just guesses, and you're bound to get some right when you guess. No audible difference for me. Maybe there's some difference, but nothing worth the extra cost. I would go with the Behringer. Oh, in fact, I am. I'm very happy with it. Hi, nice video. Greetings from Germany. It's so hard to find out. I think for me it was number 1, Motu. That was correct. Number 2, Axe-IO. Incorrect. Number 3, Apollo Solo was correct. 4, Behringer. Again, some guesses that, a couple of them worked out. But again, when you listen to it, I think that these end up just being that, guesses. Impossible to tell. The one might sound a tiny bit more distorted, but I can't tell the difference, which is a testament to the quality of AD converters today. They all might even come from the same factory. The message here is that we will need to tweak to our liking whatever gear we have. So we keep going. Couldn't begin to guess which interface matches each clip. I did notice a difference on clip 3 interface, though a little more in the higher ranges or less in the lower, which I liked. And again, I'd want to verify that with a proper blind test to verify a person could actually hear what they think they're hearing. Here's some more guesses. Number 1, Behringer. That was incorrect. Number 2, Moto Ultralight. Incorrect again. Apollo Solo for number 3 is correct, and IK Multimedia Axe-IO 1 for number 4 is correct. Thanks for this. Open my eyes. The differences are pretty minuscule to my ears. My guess is number 1, Behringer. That's not correct. Number 2, UA. That is not correct. Number 3, Axe-IO is not correct. Number 4, Motu. With something about number 2 just sounding a bit warmer, natural for some reason. And again, if that's what they're hearing, then that is actually the least expensive Behringer interface. And the final comment, hey Jason, thanks for doing these comparison videos. After watching them, I find myself focusing more on my guitar playing than on fine-tuning my equipment, listening on Sony MDR 7509 HD phones. I guess Behringer number 1, which is not correct. IK number 2, which is not correct. The Apollo Solo is number 3, and the Motu is not number 4. But again, he puts I guess question mark. So all of these guesses seem to be followed up with disclaimers that they were actually joking about them, or they were just kind of wild stabs in the dark. So now heading over to our actual project file here with them. So what we have here is I have all the cleans up here on these longer files. You can see Behringer clean, and I'm calling one optimal and one max. Optimal is what I described in the first video, is setting these to a very precise 11 dBu of headroom, which is a nice area where in fact a lot of interfaces already kind of exist. Keep in mind, to do that, the UAD Apollo Solo needed 1 dB, the tiniest bit of gain added. The Motu Ultralight needed 8 dB added. The Behringer actually had to have the input trim engaged to bring it down to 19 dBu and then add 7.5 dB of gain. And the IK Multimedia Axe-IO 1 was already less headroom than that, and I had to actually subtract within the Helix native plugin minus 1 dB. Well, here's what we end up with the clean sounds. Here's what you're going to see is optimal and max. So between the Motu Ultralight what you're hearing here is a comparison to the settings that people say, oh, there's such a wild difference when I max my input gain up as high as possible, close to clipping, and then bring it back down. So much more of all these descriptive words they use. And what we actually hear is no difference at all. Nothing perceptible. Sure, if you put it under a microscope of some sort, you might be able to measure a difference, but there's nothing audible. So if we compare that Motu now to something like the Behringer, again, if there's anything audible there, I'm not actually hearing it. Let's compare the Behringer between itself with the two different settings. So I think we're starting to see why folks are saying that they really can't decipher any difference. Apollo Solo, the most expensive interface, versus the Behringer. I'm sure if I was switching between those blindly that nobody would even know when I made the switch, or if I edited these together and used them within a mix or even outside of a mix, nobody's going to be able to hear the splice points of where they are actually changing. And if we go with the Apollo Solo set to the optimal level that I like to work at versus maxing it out into that danger zone of clipping and then backing off, again, there's really nothing there to hear. Axio 1. Again, that being the optimal level and that being with it maxed out. Let's go over to some distorted tones and take a listen to these. Starting off with the Motu Ultralight. Between the optimal or max setting, I'm hearing nothing there that's going to convince me that it's somehow beneficial to signal to noise ratio or whatnot to go with the max compared to the Apollo Solo. On its different settings, the Axio 1. Behringer. Now, even taking something like the Behringer at the optimal setting I like to work at versus its maxed out setting, which again apparently has this huge difference in signal to noise ratio. I don't know about you, but I really can't decipher any difference. Again, if we put this under some sort of measurement microscope of sorts, yes, we might be able to measure a difference. Does it make any difference in the real world? I think this test kind of leans towards proving that we're really not gaining much of anything by working in this way of constantly cranking up your input gain. I mean, yes, you have a very high headroom interface like the Motu Ultralight Mark V. I'm not going to run it way down at minimum. I'm going to bring that up to that 11 to 12 dBu max input level range and run it there, and then I can plug just about every guitar I own and almost any guitar out there into the interface without potentially clipping and destroying a take, and then I'm not constantly having to ride that up and down. All right, so there you have it. What'd you guys think? I hope that that was at least somewhat eye-opening to this whole discussion with actual audio examples, and it was so important to do a blind test to really remove the fact that people think they hear something because they know what they're listening to. It's really not doing anybody any favors to put out ways of working that are actually a lot less convenient and destroying people's workflow for gains that they think they're getting when in fact there's nothing there that's going to be perceptible or audible. Anyways, I hope that you found that somewhat useful and somewhat eye-opening, and I hope it does help some people to be able to figure out how best to use their system in a way that balances off the workflow and allowing us to get things done musically instead of constantly worrying about making these settings every time we change our guitars out. So thanks so much for tuning in. Please like the video, share it with anybody you think would get some use or enjoyment of watching it. Also, please subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content. I'll be back really soon with some more. Thank you guys again so much for sharing your time with me. I'm going to leave you today with a demo video from one of my newest Tonex tone model bundles. I hope you enjoy the music on the way out, and the links are below if you're so inclined and want to grab yourself a copy. Thanks again for sharing your time with me. Ciao for now.